everyone. Welcome to this week's podcast, Behind the Mysteries with Lee Strauss and my co-host and husband, Norm Strauss. At Behind the Mysteries, we like to look at the historical backdrop of the books in my series, the Ginger Gold Mystery Series, that are set in the 1920s. And today we have a very interesting topic, and that is mental health in the 1920s, how it was perceived and how it was treated, the stigma, and how World War I sort of affected a bit of a change of mind and heart and all of that as well. So to start off, the book's called Murder at St. George's Church. So it's actually starts off with the impending nuptials of the Reverend of the church, Oliver Hill. But it turns dark as the story goes on. And one of the secondary characters ends up being sort of put into an insane asylum. And back then they called them lunatic asylums. Wow. Or insane asylums. So there wasn't anything couching how people felt or how people perceived others who struggled, whether that's with dementia, schizophrenia, anxiety. Sometimes it was just female hysteria. There wasn't really a treatment, there wasn't an understanding, and there wasn't a treatment of it. So, do you have anything to add?
Well,
to
one
that?
of the things, talking about mental health, back then, of course, this is 5-6 years after. So we're talking about 1923, 1924, right? Mm-hmm. This was not too long after the First World War. And so during the First World War, the term shell shock, talking about mental health, mm-hmm. was starting to be used. By 1923, it was starting to be discouraged, though. They didn't use that term much anymore, or it was discouraged to be mm-hmm. used, especially in the military records. And so a lot of young men came back from the war with this thing they called at that time shell shock. And at first they thought it was, the psychiatrists thought it was something that was just from exploding shells. And then it took a while for them to figure out it's far more than that. And so a lot of young men had trouble fitting in, just like with subsequent wars and previous wars as well. It's just that in the First World War marks the first time that it was actually analyzed and studied by doctors and psychiatrists. And it was first coined by a British physician named Charles Samuel Myers. He's the guy who first came up with the term shell shock. And they also called it war neurosis. I looked all this up yesterday, so I found it interesting. Many men were just labeled as being nervous. But the symptoms, tremors, uncontrollable shaking, nightmares and insomnia, sudden rages, emotional withdrawal, panic triggered by loud noises like cars backfiring or construction noises, depression and suicidal ideation, which of course was very rarely discussed, especially that.
No. And
alcohol dependence as self-medication. So there was still enormous stigma. Masculinity in post-war Britain emphasized stoicism. So we were meant to just get on with it, especially 5-6 years after the fact. Mm-hmm. But as you can imagine, trying to hold down a job when you were afflicted with this,
yes.
They were very short-tempered. Many men startled easily. Lots of absences from work. Emotional volatility, difficulty concentrating. Mm-hmm. So you had this whole bunch of young men coming back from the war who had really hard time holding. They could get a job maybe, but holding down a job.
I'd like to just to the issue of the stigma too at the time. Mental health stigma, going to a psychiatrist or whatever, that is nothing new. Although fortunately nowadays, in recent history, probably the last 10, 15 years, it's more common for people to talk about seeing a therapist or that, just like people are way more, just even talking about ADHD or any type of mental health thing, it seems like it's easier and more accepted to talk about it and be open about it. But that is a relatively new phenomenon. I mean, I know growing up, you know, in the 60s, 70s, 80s, people didn't talk about that, and you certainly didn't share with people if you were seeing a therapist or a psychiatrist. But back in the 20s and 30s, and you know, it was extremely the stigma, and people were put into these asylums because they didn't know how to care for them. And the asylums weren't places of treatment. They weren't there to help people get better. They were there to just contain and restrain. Mm-hmm. And some of these, they were even referred to as inmates. So once a person was put into asylum, they very rarely came out. Wow. And they would spend like their entire existence there and end up dying there and being put in the cemetery next door. And there were some radical treatments that were tried back then, like, for example, a fellow named Jules Wagner Jureg actually thought it was a good idea to inject malaria into patients, thinking that the fever would help them snap out of their mental
that is very harsh.
State. Or a really popular one was deep sleep therapy, which basically they just you know, barbiturates. They just drugged them and into where they were just sleeping all the time, and they thought that this deep sleep would bring them out of a dementia. So there was a lot that was unknown. There weren't any psychotic drugs or anything. So it was very, very tough time for anybody who suffered from mental health. And that is when, you know, what Norm was talking about, this is sort of the what the state of the union was, the status was at the time when you had all these soldiers coming back. And so
yeah, and a lot of marriages suffered from this whole shell shock thing too. If you can imagine emotional intimacy and quick-tempered and all these things that I listed, you know, made it very hard for marriages. And at the same time, divorce was really not nearly as...
You couldn't do that either.
You know, and talking about cures, the cures for war neurosis, or whatever they would call it back then, there was early forms of talk, what they called talk therapy, talk it through.
Right.
Which is probably one of the more positive ways.
That was probably a positive outcome, because prior to then they didn't use talk therapy at all. It was just subdue the patient and hope for the best.
You can imagine a time where you're going through emotional distress like this, and talking about it was not a thing.
No.
It wasn't thought of as any kind of cure. They also used electrotherapy, which I don't know much about, but it sounds nasty. It sounds just as nasty as injecting you with, what did you say, malaria?
Yeah.
So you have your choice today. You can be injected with the malaria, or we're going to hook up electrodes to you. You see that dial over there? When it gets to there, we're going to shut it off.
Or we'll just drug you and you'll sleep your life away.
Yes, very nasty.
Yeah.
And of course, for the soldiers, and then if that didn't work, it was institutionalization, which you were just talking about. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so, you know, there were plenty of institutes, big ones too. Like, I was surprised when I was researching for the book. I came across a couple of asylums in the London, England area, and one was called the West Riding Pauper Lunatic Asylum. That was the actual name. So obviously it was for the people who couldn't afford better treatment, and I just can't imagine what life would have been like for them. And it was open for 155 years.
Wow.
And there's a cemetery there that you can visit and see that all the people who live behind bars, it was like a prison almost. Well, it was basically, they were held against their will. A lot of them were institutionalized against their will, and they end up dying there, and they're buried in the cemetery. But the one I based my fictional asylum on was called the Hanwell London County Asylum, and it was at one time the world's largest. And there it was open from 1889 to 1917, And there, are photographs of the place, which was very, useful for me as a author to be able to describe a fictional place. But there was also an aerial view, and the place was massive. And I can't, imagine like how many people ended up there, but a lot of women, and then again, soldiers when they came back from the war. So, we have come a long way in a lot of aspects, but in the area of mental health, I'm glad to say that we have proper, or drugs that work and are being improved all the time, that people can have normal lives. The way the brain works is understood in ways it never was back then. I mean, we can be kind of grateful for the time in history that we're alive.
And the stigma isn't so much the shame involved, especially these soldiers that I was saying. It was, a lot of them just didn't talk to anybody about it.
Yeah. Just
because of the shame. And so, that stigma. And so today, there's far less of a stigma, thank God. But,
yes. And so I guess we're we're happy that
kind of a dark subject to talk about.
It's a little bit one of our darker topics. Not all of them are like that, but I mean, you have to kind of take the good with the bad, or the hard with the easy. And so I'm happy that we can shed some light on mental health issues, and maybe this would be a good time to say that if you're feeling any type of struggle, if it's with depression or anxiety or something you don't understand, please do reach out to a professional. I know that you can go online and find somebody there. Maybe we'll put a link in the description of, where you can go for help. Or if you're feeling suicidal or whatever, there's help, and there are resources, and there are people waiting to help. And so please don't suffer alone. You just don't need to. And so we hope you do reach out and get the help if you need it, or if you know of someone who needs it. And just seeing your doctor is the first step, because it could be something that just, a medication can help balance things out.
Yeah.
So, we've all been there. We've all been places where times have been tough, and sometimes, you just need some assistance in whatever form that might look like. So, we want to end this on an up note. So we wish you all well, and thank you for joining us today. And please, check out our description. Don't forget to subscribe, and
if you haven't read Murder at St. George's Church,
there'll be a link in the description for that. It's always, the murder always gets solved, so you can be relieved. And these are cozy historical mysteries. So cozy means that nothing bad happens really on the page, and you don't have to feel anxious when you're reading it. Any type of sort of drama at the end is very mild and short-lived, and it all works out in the end. And and Ginger and Basil have a really nice relationship story that goes well throughout the whole series. So you don't have to worry about that going awry either. Just a comment. So so please leave a comment too if you have something you'd like to add that we didn't touch on, or some experience that you want to share. Or if you just learned something new and you'd like to let us know about that, please do in the comments. All right, thanks very much.
Thanks for joining us.
Next time.